academic disciplines are characterized by the types of questions they ask. In fact, if someone asked you what a particular academic discipline was about, one effective way of answering that question would be to give examples of the kinds of questions that the people in those disciplines try to answer. For instance, biologists ask questions like how do organisms evolve over time, and what processes sustain life at the cellular level. Economists ask questions such as what causes inflation and how do markets allocate resources. Historians ask questions like what were the causes and consequences of major revolutions, and how did cultural practices develop across civilizations. Psychologists ask questions such as what motivates human behavior and how do people form memories and learn. In this sense, philosophy is just like any other academic discipline. It has its own set of questions it concerns itself with, and which set it apart from other areas of study. Philosophers ask questions such as, do human beings have free will? What makes an action morally right or morally wrong? Does God exist? What does it mean to persist as the same person through time? Is it rational to fear death? And what is the meaning of life? Yet, as you glance through this list of questions, you may also come away with the sense that there is something different about the questions asked by philosophy. Something distinct that makes it not quite like other subjects. To see this, let's compare the following two questions from the examples just listed, one from biology and the other from psychology. Biologists ask, what processes sustain life at the cellular level? Psychologists ask, how do people form memories and learn? These are, of course, very different questions that require quite different methods of investigation. However, despite this, we can say that both of these questions can be approached through a scientific method. The person who wanted to answer either of these questions would have to conduct some sort of empirical investigation into the human organism. Again, the aspects of that organism being investigated would differ in each case, the cellular structure of the human body versus the human brain, but the general orientation would be similar. Yet, in many cases, the scientific orientation demanded by questions of this sort seems ill-suited for answering philosophical questions. Consider again the following example. Philosophers ask, what makes an action morally right or morally wrong? Unlike some philosophical questions, this is a question that has a clear and obvious bearing on the human being and human actions. In that sense, it is similar to both the biological and psychological questions we posed before. Nevertheless, it is not the type of question that can be settled through scientific investigation. There is no experiment or study we can run to determine whether some action or policy abides by or runs afoul of the demands of morality. We can conduct studies to find out what people think is morally right or wrong at a given time, and of course this is very common in social science. Yet, as valuable and interesting as this information can be, it cannot settle any questions about what is morally right and wrong. The fact that many people believe some action is morally acceptable doesn't necessarily mean that it is so. Whatever it is, if anything, that makes some moral claims true and others false, it isn't the type of thing that will show up under a microscope or in survey data. Perhaps then the conclusion we should draw is that philosophy isn't a science. After all, philosophy is typically included under the heading of the humanities. Perhaps then it would be better to view philosophy as analogous to some sort of artistic endeavor, something like poetry or painting. These are disciplines for which we typically allow a greater degree of subjectivity than we do with the sciences. That isn't to say that our appreciation of art is entirely subjective. We can, and people have, come up with rules and principles which distinguish what is beautiful from what is ugly, what is high art from what is low art. Yet we also recognize that art involves taste. Ultimately, for a work of art to be successful, it must impact its audience in some way. It must entertain, delight, inspire. Furthermore, we recognize that not everyone will be impacted by the same works of art in the same way. Now, to be clear, this may also be true of philosophy to some extent. Yet certain philosophical questions do not seem to fit the overall pattern of what happens in an artistic discipline. Let's consider another of the philosophical questions we listed before. Philosophers ask, does God exist? It is, of course, true that the concept of God may invoke all sorts of responses in different people, reactions ranging from piety and reverence to resentment and skepticism. The way a person reacts to a claim about the existence of God will depend upon various factors, including that person's cultural background and psychological disposition. However, from a philosophical point of view, the fact that different people react in these ways has no bearing upon the truth of this question, the truth about whether or not God exists. As much as the participants in the debate disagree about a wide range of matters, they do tend to agree about this. They tend to agree that there is some true answer to this question. The theist believes it is true that God exists. The atheist believes that this statement is false. But both believe they are discussing a question that has a real answer. This isn't merely a matter of taste. Someone is correct and someone is incorrect. That remains the case even if we will never be in a position to know which is which. So philosophy doesn't seem to sit any more comfortably alongside the disciplines of poetry and painting than it does alongside subjects like biology and psychology. What then is it that makes philosophical questions distinct from other types of questions? What is it that makes a question philosophical in the first place? This may be an unsatisfactory resolution to this video, but unfortunately I do not have that answer for you. Instead, these are precisely the questions I invite you to consider this week as we take our first steps of the semester in thinking philosophically.